Well, hopefully many of you know who I am, but my name is Pastor Matt, and if you don't know who I am, it's very nice to meet you. Glad to be here this morning with you to bring God's Word. We're going to be in Ezekiel chapter 19 this morning, so you can grab that Bible in front of you, you can get out your own Bible, you can look it up on your phone, however you access God's Word. But that's where we're going to be this morning, continuing our walk through Ezekiel. So we're talking about misconceptions this morning. Who's ever had a misconception before? If you're not raising your hand, you have a misconception about misconceptions. But yes, we have these often, and the hard thing about misconceptions is you don't know that they're misconceptions until you really know, right? Until you understand. And when I'm not a pastor, I'm actually also a middle school math teacher. And I deal with misconceptions all the time with my students. So I brought a middle school math problem here for you today to see how you do. Now, if you were here at 8 o'clock, you're not allowed to cheat and tell people. But let's see. All right, 7 to the power of 3 times 7 to the power of 9. For some of you, middle school was a long time ago. What do you think this could be? Maybe you have some misconceptions going on trying to solve this problem. So did you say 49 to the power of 27? 7 times 7 is 49. 3 times 9 is 27. If you said that, you would be wrong. That's not the correct answer. So maybe I don't mess with the sevens and I just multiply the exponents, the powers. So 7 to the power of 27. Maybe some of you got that answer. No, that's wrong. The correct answer is 7 to the power of 12. Because, surprised you didn't know this, the product of powers property tells us that when we have the same base with exponents or powers, we multiply them together, we add the exponents and keep the base the same. Some of you are nodding. Some mathematicians out there are like, yes, I knew this. So there's a couple of misconceptions just with this problem, right? You could think, 7 times 7. I see 7 times 7. Okay, 49, right? If you know your multiplication tables, got to know those multiplication tables. But 7 times 7 is 49, so it's got to be 49. And then, I see two numbers in the exponents. Maybe I multiply those together too. Misconceptions. No, actually, you don't really multiply anything in this problem. You add the exponents, the powers. So these are some of the misconceptions I deal with on a daily basis, basically. But today, we're talking about a tragic misconception that the people of Judah, who were in exile, and also the ones that stayed behind, had about God and about his character and about their own place with God, and if they were protected and if they would fall under judgment. And we're going to look at that misconception today and then maybe think about some conceptions we possibly could have. So we're going to get into a lament, a song, a parable that has lions, it has vines, it has dry east winds, it has deserts. So I need you to stick with me as we go through this, because I'm going to try and point out what each of these things mean in Judah at the time of Ezekiel, and then I promise it'll pay off. It'll come together at the end, and we'll figure out what this could mean for us. So we're going to start with verse 1, again, of Ezekiel chapter 19. Verse 1. As for you, so this is God talking to Ezekiel. So we're switching gears a little bit from chapter 18, and now God is calling up on Ezekiel to take up a song of mourning for the leaders of Israel and we're going to look at what he says in a minute. But this song of mourning, the Hebrew word is kina, and it's a technical term for a special kind of music, mourning the loss, usually of a person, maybe a leader. Sometimes it could be applied to like a nation or a group of people. But usually it was applied to a leader. It was a song, they would have these long songs of lament that they would sing, remembering the person and saying how tragic it was and how sad they were. A good example We find them all over Scripture, all over the Old Testament, but a good example is 2 Chronicles 35:25. Then Jeremiah chanted a song of mourning, same word, song of mourning for Josiah. And Josiah was the king who was a righteous king and had a lot of reforms in Judah. He was the king before the kings we talk about today. So all the kings we talk about today are direct descendants of Josiah. But they chanted a song of mourning for Josiah, and all male and female singers speak about Josiah in their songs of mourning to this day. Same word, songs of mourning. So you get this idea. It's like a lament that you would sing to remember someone, to express how sad you are, basically. So this is what Ezekiel is told to do. Take up this song of mourning and say. So let's get into what it says. But first, I'm going to label this. This song of mourning is the tragedy of Judah and her kings. So that's the song of lament. That's the tragedy. But what we're going to see is it's actually a little bit of a parody on this lament. Ezekiel is singing this song of lament, but it's almost sarcastic or like a parody, like, oh, how terrible this is. Look at what happens when you go against God, right? So the tragedy of Judah and her kings who kind of get what they deserve. That's basically what this song is called. It's, oh, how terrible, terrible, but they kind of get what they deserve. And our first clue to this is that because he says, well, I'll go back to verse 1, take up a song of mourning for the leaders of Israel. And the actual word here is princes. And some of your translations may say princes of Israel. So he doesn't even call them kings. It's very obvious that this song is about the kings of Judah, but he calls them princes, leaders. He can't even call them kings. So we see right off the bat, okay, something is a little amiss here. This is almost a parody or a sarcasm or something like that. And then we get another clue. He says, what was your mother? What was your mother? Usually you would think it would be, who is your mother? If we're talking about the princes, the leaders of Israel, who, right? But what was your mother? So we see this is kind of a riddle almost. It's almost like chapter 17. If you remember the eagle and the vine, and the riddle back in chapter 17, it's almost like that. We expect who, but we see what. But then, what was your mother? Your is singular. So we know he's going to be talking about individual kings, leaders, princes of Judah as he goes. And what does he say? What was your mother? A lioness among lions. She lay down among young lions. She raised her cubs. So this is like a normal story for a lioness. I think I have a picture up here. There she is with her cubs. And this is actually an Asiatic lion. So I'm correct. I'm biologically correct with my pictures. These are very, very endangered now, but they were plentiful at the time of Ezekiel, and they were all in the Middle East and everything. So this is the lioness with her cubs. And usually they would have about 2 to 5 cubs in a litter laying down among her cubs. And we'll see it seems clear from the context that the lioness actually is the tribe of Judah, the kingdom of Judah, or even more specifically, the house of David, the Davidic dynasty that's ruled for 400 years. That's the lioness that Ezekiel is talking about. So she just has these cubs, and then verse 3, we read about a specific one. When she brought up one of her cubs, so she elevates one of them above the others, he became a young lion, and he learned to tear his prey. He devoured people. Wow, that's a twist. He learned to tear his prey. Okay, that's what lions do, but he devoured people. The destructive and kind of predatory tendencies of lions was a popular thing that they would talk about in the Old Testament, a popular illustration. We read about it in the Psalms. This is David, so this is the person that this whole house comes from. All the kings come from David, and he says in one of his Psalms, "O Lord my God, in you I have taken refuge. Save me from all those who pursue me and rescue me. Or he will" what? "Tear my soul like a lion dragging me away while there was no one to rescue me. Very vivid language. You can imagine a lion attacking someone, dragging them away. And then a couple Psalms later in Psalm 17, he says of his enemy that's trying to get him, he is like a lion that is eager to tear. Same language, right? And as a young lion lurking in secret places. So we see lions in the Old Testament and how they can be terrifying and how they can attack and tear and devour. And in the New Testament, we read in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, he describes the devil as a roaring lion, walking around seeking those that he can devour. But the surprising twist is our lion here has now learned to devour human flesh. There he is. He's grown up. What if you saw this? What if you walked out of church and suddenly, uh-oh. That wouldn't be great, right? This is what this lion has become, a prowling lion looking to devour human flesh. And it seems from the context, and I'll show you why in a minute, but this cub actually stands for King Jehoahaz of Judah, the son of Josiah, who was king right after Josiah died. So he's the first king after Josiah, Jehoahaz. And we read about him. He devoured people. We read about him in 2 Kings chapter 23, 31 through 32. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 3 months in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, in accordance with all that his forefathers had done. Josiah had been a great reformer. He had been mostly righteous, following God. But here we go. Jehoahaz goes back to the old habits of the kings, does evil in the sight of the Lord. And we know a lot of that evil is bloodshed, is oppression, is injustice. That's what God calls these kings out for over and over, of oppressing the fatherless, the widow, those who are in need, and also for idolatry, for turning the nation's hearts away from the Lord, devouring humans, not only physically, but their spiritual lives, their relationship with God as well. So what happens to this cub? So here, this is just a little illustration to make sure you understand what's happening. Cute little cub, right? Hopefully you can see him. He wasn't so cute a minute ago, but he's back to being cute. This is Jehoahaz, and we read about him in 2 Kings 23. So that's who the cub is in this illustration, in this lament. So what happens to him? Then the nations heard about him. He was caught in their trap, and they brought him with hooks to the land of Egypt. Lion hunting was actually something that rulers and kind of rich people in the ancient Near East loved to do. They would love to go on these fantastical lion hunts. And one thing they would do is they would dig a ditch, a big hole, a trap, and kind of direct the lion into that, and the lion would fall down, and that's where they would get the lion. So that's what they did to this cub, and then they brought him with hooks, vivid language, to the land of Egypt. And that's what tells us that this is about Jehoahaz, because if you continue reading in 2 Kings 23, you read about how he was taken captive by the ruler of Egypt and shipped off to Egypt and taken there, never to return. So the first king after Josiah is wicked and quickly taken to Egypt, and that's who this lament is talking about. So what happens next? Verse 5. When she saw, so the lioness, when she saw, she waited, that her hope was lost. Her cub was gone. Her hope was lost. So what did she do? She took another one of her cubs and made him a young lion. Took another one of her cubs and made him a young lion. And let's read some of the language about this lion. And he walked about among the lions. He became a young lion. He learned to tear his prey, and he devoured people. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, same language, right? Same language as the other lion. So it seems that this lion replaced the other one. And we get a clue to this at the very beginning of verse 6. He walked about among the lions. So you can imagine kind of strutting. He's strutting about among the lions. The way the Hebrew is arranged there, it's almost like staking claim. It's It's the idea of staking claim. So this lion is supposed to take the place of the old lion. And then in verse 7, we get even more kind of sordid details. He destroyed their palaces. And the Hebrew language here is very similar to widows and new. So some translations will actually say, and seized their widows. And I think this makes it a little bit more clear if we stay with the lion language. This lion not only struts about, but he takes all the kind of the harem of the lionesses of the other lion to complete his conquest, to show that he's the boss, to assure that the next line of lions is from him. And he laid waste to their cities. He was just destructive, careless destruction, chaos. The land and its fullness were appalled because of the sound of his roaring. The roaring of lions, if you've ever heard it, it's kind of this majestic, almost frightening thing. It's said that you can hear a roar of lions from like 5 miles away. But this lion, they were appalled when he roared. They were appalled. So this lion, we can see kind of from the context that the description fits the next king, Jehoiakim. Everyone say that, Jehoiakim. Yeah, there you go. That's the next king of Judah. And when I think of Jehoiakim, I think of this. Do you guys know who that is? Who is that? Don't say the Lion King, because he's not the true king. That's Scar, right? The villain of the Lion King. But when I think of strutting about, when I think of replacing the old king, when I think of just kind of ruining the whole country, Scar becomes king, and he takes over, and kind of the whole Pride lands, the whole nation or whatever, is destroyed and desolate. Anyway, I thought of Scar when I thought of this king. But it's Jehoiakim. And we read about him in 2 Kings 23, continuing in verse 35. So Jehoiakim gave silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he assessed the land in order to give the money at the command of Pharaoh. So now you can kind of understand why his roar would not be good news. They wouldn't like to hear that in the nation, because he's getting money from them to pay Pharaoh. He collected the silver and gold from the people of the land, each according to his assessment, to give to Pharaoh Necho. And we also read, this is actually 2 Kings 24, verse 3. It indeed came upon Judah at that command of the Lord to remove them from his sight in accordance with everything that he, and in this context, it's Jehoiakim, had done, and also for the innocent blood which he shed. So he sheds innocent blood, and he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was unwilling to forgive. So this was a very destructive, wicked, evil king, kind of like Scar. But he ruined the country. He filled it with innocent blood. So now we have our second cub. There he is. And we know that it's Jehoiakim, the second king after Josiah. So let's read about what happens to him, this destructive, wicked king. Verse 8, then nations set against him on every side from their provinces, and they spread their net over him. That was another way they would catch lions. They would chase them and corral them and then throw a net on them. He was caught in their trap. And when you continue reading about him in 2 Kings, you read about how the king of Babylon called people from all the different provinces in his empire. So every province in the Babylonian Empire sent people to go and fight against Judah, against this king. And that's what we read about in this lament. But the craziest detail here is that the nations were the liberators. The nations were the heroes. And the king of Judah, the king himself, was the villain. He was the one who needed to be removed, and the nations came in and rescued the people, essentially, from this villainous king. They were the liberators. So what's happened to the glorious house of David? This glorious thing that's been on the throne for 400 years, what's happened? That the nations are the heroes of the story. And Ezekiel telling this to the exiles, and they have to be thinking, so what does this mean? What does this mean for us, the people of Judah? We thought we were protected. We thought these kings would protect us, but they're the villains. And I think we can think about ourselves here as kind of the new people of God, as Christians, as followers of Jesus. Is it possible that sometimes we can rage and rage and rage until other people become the heroes? Can we get so angry about our culture? And there are many, many things, obviously, to get angry about. But can we get so enraged and lose sight of how Jesus told us to act towards people, to love people, to be kind? Can we lose sight of that people turn away from us to others to get love, to get kindness, to get salvation? Do we rage and rage and rage so we become the villains in our own story? Well, unlike chapter 17, if you remember, you got all these kind of explanations of who the eagles are, who the vine is and everything. We're not so lucky in this chapter, in chapter 19. So we don't get to find out who the lions were and everything. Ezekiel doesn't tell us that, but I just told you that, so you're good to go. So next, we're going to turn to, this also happened to the lion. They put him in wooden collar with hooks, brought him to the king of Babylon. They brought him in hunting nets so his voice would no longer be heard on the mountains of Israel. What a tragedy. What a tragedy for the king of Israel, the king of Judah. So now we're going to switch gears. And now the lions are gone, and in comes this vine. So Ezekiel now says, your mother was like a vine in your vineyard, planted by the waters. It was fruitful and thick with branches because of abundant waters. So the image changes to a vine, and a vine is a very familiar picture of the people of God in the Old Testament. I mean, think Isaiah 5, that's probably the most famous one, where God talks about how he planted a vineyard and he planted this vine that would grow, and the people of Israel are actually the vine. And we see this other places in the Old Testament. And this one is an amazing plant. It's planted by waters. It was fruitful and thick with branches. Is anyone a gardener? No gardeners. I guess because we live in Phoenix, right? This is like a gardener's dream. A fruitful and thick with branches, so much foliage you can't even see the fruit. It's an abundant and healthy plant. I tried, my wife over here will tell you actually, I tried a couple years ago to grow a passion fruit vine because I love passion fruit. I was like, I'm just going to grow one. It was not fruitful and thick with branches. It wasn't. It just withered and died because we live in the desert. But this plant it has abundant waters. And it had strong stems in verse 11, fit for scepters of rulers. And its height was raised above the clouds, so that it was seen in its height with the mass of its branches. So it sends out rods of strength and scepters of rulers. It had authority. Authority came out of this vine. It grew so high that it was over the clouds and could be seen for miles around. I mean, that's something over the clouds. You're going to be able to see it for miles around. So this could show its abundance. Or does this height show its arrogance? Maybe it shows its arrogance. So this vine, we'll come to find out, is like the lioness, you probably guessed, is the tribe of Judah, or more specifically the house of David, the Davidic dynasty. Well, what happens to this vine? Maybe it turns out really well. What do you think? Maybe not. Just like the cubs. But it was uprooted in fury and was thrown down to the ground. So that gives us a clue that maybe the height wasn't such a good thing, because a vine is supposed to actually be pretty close to the ground and give off grapes, right? That's probably the vine that we're thinking about. But it gave up its normal use, what it was supposed to do, and tried to be lofty, like the nations around them. What happened was they saw, all these empires being built around them, and they wanted to be like them. So they took on their gods, and they took on their practices, and they wanted to be lofty and be seen by all the nations. But they forgot what they were supposed to do, what God called them to do. So they were uprooted in fury and thrown to the ground. And the east wind, the Babylonian Empire, the Babylonians from the east, dried up its fruit. Its strong stem, so now we're told about a strong stem, was torn out so that it withered, and the fire consumed it. So a strong branch was torn off and burned. And what we see from the context is this is King Jehoiachin. Not Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin. Okay, you got to remember to get that right. And he was actually the last of his line, because after him, his uncle is made king by the Babylonians, and we'll talk about him in a minute. But this is King Jehoiachin. So now we have our strong stem that was torn off the vine. King Jehoiachin. And you can read about him in 2 Kings 24, 6 through 16. But he had a very short rule as well, because he rebelled against the king of Babylon, so the Babylonians came in, and this was the exile that took even Ezekiel out of the land to Babylon, and King Jehoiachin was taken as well. So that's who this king is. That's the strong stem that was ripped off and put to the ground and burnt, because he's the last of his line. And in verse 13 and 14 we read, "And now it is planted." So the vine is now planted in the wilderness, in a dry and thirsty land in Babylon. And fire has gone out from its stem. So now we're talking about a new stem. It has a new stem, but the new stem, fire is going out from it. It has consumed its shoots and its fruit, so that there's no strong stem in it, a scepter to rule. Fire has gone out from this stem and just consumed everything. So we know that this stem, this last stem that they're talking about, has to be the last king. So the new stem is now Zedekiah. And you read about him in 2 Kings 24 and 25. But this was the last king of Judah. And he was just as wicked as those kings that came before him. And you heard about in the lament how fire went out from within this stem and consumed everything. So the house of David has finally just destroyed the nation, has finally just destroyed itself. Remember, the scepter was burnt up too, has finally just destroyed itself. So the despicable sin and self-aggrandizement of these last kings of the house of David has provoked the wrath of Yahweh, who punishes it by uprooting it and humiliating it, subjecting it to the Babylonians and transplanting it to a strange land. That's what this lament is all about. That's the story that it's telling. And it's not just a critique of Judah's kings, but also of the people, also of the nation as a whole, because the kings stand for the people. So the exiles are reminded while they wallow in misery in Babylon, because that's who Ezekiel's talking to, these exiles in Babylon, they remember that this once glorious house, this nation that they were a part of, is now kind of a pathetic remainder of a proud plant. And instead of the vine being destroyed by outside forces, it's destroyed from within. It's destroyed from within. So the Davidic ruler of Judah is gone. So we see the tragedy that the end of 400 years of David on the throne, it's over. It's over. But this lament actually goes back even further. If you look at the imagery, this is the end of the lament. This is a song of mourning, and it has become a song of mourning. Because Zedekiah, what happened to Zedekiah hadn't happened yet when Ezekiel's giving this prophecy, but everything that was said in this lament has actually come to pass. So it has become a song of mourning. But if we go back further to Genesis chapter 49, listen to Jacob's blessing of his son Judah. Remember, Jacob has all his sons and he gives them blessings. And this is what he says to Judah. "Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares to stir him up?" A lion. We've kind of heard this about lions, cubs, and everything. "The scepter will not depart from Judah." We've heard about a scepter. Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. And then listen to this. He ties his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine and his robes in the blood of grapes. So in Jacob's blessing of Judah, we have lion and vine. We have this imagery. And the only other place that these two appear together is in Ezekiel 19. So it's no coincidence that Ezekiel is reaching all the way back to the very beginning, to the patriarchs, and saying, not only is the story of the house of David a tragedy, not only is that a disaster, but actually this goes back 1,000 years, all the way to the patriarchs. So you guys thought that David, a king of David, was protecting you, that you'd be protected, but even if you think the patriarchs, God's promises to the patriarchs and everything is protecting you, that you're the people of God, it's the same tragedy unfolding. It's the same end. It goes back even further. He deliberately undermines the false hope and aspirations of the fellow exiles. So we go back to misconceptions. They had a tragic misconception, the people that were in Babylon, the people that were still left in Israel. It said this, that God made an eternal covenant with David and with the patriarchs, which is true, by the way. He did. But they were banking on God's commitment to those promises, whether they were faithful or not. They being the people. Whether the people were faithful or not, they were saying, no, he'll be committed to those promises. So long as a descendant of David occupied the throne in Jerusalem, the Judeans thought they could hope for divine protection. They thought, there's a king there, we're good, we're safe, because God is still remembering his promises. They didn't recognize that God would actually not put up with their wicked ways anymore, and especially as the representative, the king. He wouldn't put it up with it. The leaders would meet tragic ends, and the good luck charm of the people would be gone. They wouldn't have that protection anymore. And what the biggest misconception that they had is that God could fulfill his promises without them. He didn't need the kings sitting on the throne. He didn't need all of them, the people of Judah. We know, and later we learn in Ezekiel, that God did fulfill these promises. There is an eternal person on the throne and a descendant of David, Jesus. Jesus came and he was the righteous branch. He was the perfectly righteous king, descendant of David, and fulfilled all the promises of God. But for these kings and for the people in exile, their false hope was exactly that, a misconception. God would judge them if they turned away from him. The king could not protect them. In chapter 18, we heard that, if you remember a couple weeks ago, we heard that children don't die for their father's sins, right? Well, the other way is true as well. That children aren't righteous because of their father's righteousness or because of their descendants' righteousness. We're each held accountable for how we live. So thinking about these misconceptions that the people of Judah had, that this lament is all about, gives us a couple questions. So what misconceptions might you have about God and his promises? What misconceptions could we have as the new people of God? What lies have we bought into that have given us a false view of God, a false view of what a relationship with him looks like? I go to church. I hear it all the time at school. Oh, I go to church. Sure, I'm a Christian. I'm part of a Christian family. My parents are followers of Jesus, so I'm good. I prayed the prayer. I know the language. I mean, I live how I want. I do what I want, but yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm a good person, so it's fine. Does this mean I'm protected from God's judgment? Because of a label? Because of some outward acts? The outward acts aren't bad, feeding the homeless, or reading the Bible, praying before meals, whatever it may be. But are those what will protect me from judgment? Maybe some knowledge that I have? This is a misconception that we can have. It's so easy in our culture to have this misconception. What did Jesus say to people that he called? He said, follow me, right? Follow me. He said, pick up your cross daily and follow me. Key word, it's a relationship. It's a relationship. It's not a label. It's not things we do. It's not people in our family. It's a relationship. If you don't have a personal, daily walk, relationship with the living Lord of the universe, then you are not protected from judgment. Don't have that misconception. You need to trust and follow Jesus. But what about those of us who do trust and follow Jesus? So what misconceptions might we have about our walk with Christ? What misconceptions could we have? Where are we falling short? Or do we always think, you know what, at this point, I'm good. I'm satisfied with my relationship with Christ. I preach sometimes at the Sunday night service, and last week we were reading from James chapter 4, and James writes to the church and talks about how the Christians, the people that followed Jesus, were full of envy, were full of deceit, were full of wrath, anger at each other, were full of jealousness, selfish ambition. And it was causing conflicts in the church. Do we harbor these things? Do we think, oh, yeah, I believe in Jesus, I follow him. I mean, you know, I might be jealous of this person and gossip a little bit about him because I kind of am jealous. Or I don't like this group of people, so I harbor a lot of anger and wrath in my heart about them, and I try and say as much bad things about them as possible. Or this person, I can't stand that person. I'm just not going to even try and be around them. Do we harbor these things in our hearts? I mean, we do have a new covenant. Like, we're not going to go to hell. I mean, the people of Judah were facing direct, wrathful judgment from God. And we're protected. If you have a relationship with Jesus, you are protected from eternal judgment. But do you want to kind of just follow Jesus? Do you want to just get by? I also teach Sunday school, and in our class in Luke, we're going through Luke, we just talked about the cost of discipleship. Jesus says, count the cost because you have to give me everything. You have to give me your whole life on a daily basis. Do we have a misconception that it's not going to cost us? That I can follow Jesus and still love the culture, watch whatever they tell me to watch, love whatever they tell me to love, think about whatever they want me to think about, but I'm good because I still follow Jesus. Have we counted the cost? Do we have that misconception? The people of Judah were lost because they were content where they were with their king on the throne. They thought they had protection. They should not have been content. They should not have felt safe. So the question is, are you content with where you are in your walk with Christ? If you take a closer look, should you be? If we looked at ourselves, should we be content with it? We don't want a tragedy like Ezekiel 19. We don't want a tragedy like that told about us either on earth or in heaven someday. Certainly we don't want that. So may we not rely on misconceptions about what protects us and what it means to follow Christ. Would you pray with me? God, thank you so much for your word and the blessing of going through your word in Ezekiel, and we pray that you'll continue to speak to us. Pray that everyone in here, that we may not have misconceptions, that we'll search your word to understand you more fully, and that we will seek counsel to understand you more fully, and that we will have thriving personal relationships with you where you lead us on a daily basis, Lord. Be with us, and may we go and have a wonderful rest of the day. In your name we pray, amen.